shelling of northern Israel were the last straw. Moshe Aarons, the Israeli ambassador to Washington, said today on the program This Week with David Brinkley that this operation would eliminate the problem.
Well, the Israeli army has moved into southern Lebanon. It has a clear-cut single mission, namely pushing the PLO forces out of artillery range of Israeli settlements and towns in northern Israel so that we can get the people, the women, the children out of the shelters. Israel, of course, has no claim on a single square inch of Lebanese territory. Israel will do everything possible to avoid engagements or hostilities with the Syrian army. The Israeli government has announced that. It has that one single mission, and that is to get the PLO out of artillery and rocket range of northern Israel.
While these troops went into battle, the Israelis said they lost one Skyhawk jet fighter and one helicopter gunship, but admitted to no other losses. Prime Minister Begin received the support of opposition leader Shimon Peres, thus has a national consensus for the Israeli attack on the PLO. President Reagan, in a letter, urged Begin to keep a cool head and not let the fighting spread. Begin replied that he hoped that President Reagan understood Israel's position. Tonight, that position is clear: to destroy the PLO military force in Lebanon once and for all. Bill Siemens, ABC News in Israel.
The Israeli invasion of Lebanon has been deep and wide. It encompasses an area slightly smaller than Delaware and about a third larger than Rhode Island. By general estimates, the Palestinians are outnumbered 5-1. And as the PLO itself says, Israeli firepower is overwhelming. On the ground, across a front about 40 miles wide, Israeli armor has pushed north and east to the town of Hasbaya. In a central sector, they've attacked and captured the market town of Nabatea. And nearby, they've taken the strategic Palestinian fighting position at Beaufort Castle. Along the Mediterranean coast, the ancient city of Tyre, according to the Israelis, has been captured. And farther north, about halfway from the border to Beirut, an Israeli amphibious landing was made north of Sidon. Clearly, the Israeli intention is to cut off any Palestinian withdrawal. We have reports from both sides of the battle lines. That from Israel has been censored. Here is ABC's Hillary Brown tonight in the Israeli-occupied town of Nabatea.
For the past 24 hours, the Israelis have been pounding the Palestinians in their former stronghold of Nabatea, firing from positions high above the town. By mid-afternoon, they had flushed out all but a few of the terrorists. As the Israeli tanks rolled in, the villagers greeted them with flowers. The Palestinians were getting to be too much for us, one told me. They said that most of the terrorists had fled, leaving their dead behind. The town itself was in ruins after what people said was 3 straight days of shelling and aerial bombardment. This afternoon, refugees began to stream northward towards Sidon. That will not help them much. This afternoon, the Israeli Defense Ministry announced that it had landed this amphibious force north of Sidon, including tanks, APCs, and paratroopers, to encircle the town and block PLO escape routes to Beirut. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Begin met U.S. envoy Philip Habib this afternoon to discuss the situation. Habib intensely worried that it could get out of hand. Israeli officials said Habib was kept waiting until the facts on the ground suited Israel. And the Israelis continue to send more troops and supplies into South Lebanon. The massive amounts of arms and armor moved over the past 24 hours has raised fears that the Israelis could clash with some of the 30,000 Syrian troops based in Lebanon. Hillary Brown, ABC News, with Israeli forces in South Lebanon.
This is Chris Harper in Beirut. Israeli warplanes pounded the area around the headquarters of the PLO in central Beirut today, leaving scores of people dead and wounded. As anger over the Israeli invasion mounted, unidentified gunmen fired rockets at the American embassy here. There were no injuries, but the staff of 50 people is now being cut substantially. The PLO says resistance on all fronts is continuing, but it is clear that the Palestinians are seriously outgunned. Israeli boats shelled the coastal roads to stop supplies from reaching the PLO, sending refugees fleeing from the no-man's land. In the air, the Israelis poured their planes into the skies over Lebanon again today. At least 2 Israeli pilots were shot down in a hail of anti-aircraft fire.
I am not afraid, and you can see me. I have been treated well.
Syria put up some of its jets to battle the Israelis. and also lost several soldiers in artillery duels, raising fears that the fight here may get even worse. It is obvious that the Israelis are going to continue to bomb here in Lebanon until they reach their objectives, and the PLO is bracing for a long battle. Chris Harper, ABC News, outside Beirut.
To say that war in Lebanon has intensified is to very much understate developments. Israel says today it shot down 22 Syrian fighter planes in aerial combat and lost none of its own. Syria admits it lost 16 of its Soviet-made aircraft, but adds that it shot down 19 Israeli fighter bombers. Whichever claim turns out to be accurate, there have been increasingly violent encounters between Israel and Syria. Both sides agree that in eastern Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, Israel made a massive attack on Syria's missile positions. Israel says they were all destroyed. On the Mediterranean coast, Israel has now captured yet another Lebanese town, Damour, once a Palestinian stronghold just south of Beirut. There are any number of unconfirmed reports, one of which is that Israeli forces are in the outskirts of Beirut, a capital living on little more than raw nerves. Our first report from the region comes from ABC's Bill Siemens, who's in Israel.
Israeli artillery also pounded the Bekaa Valley Syrian positions. The firing continued all day long, while overhead there were fleeting flashes of Syrian MiGs and Israeli F-15s dueling in the big air battle that tore through the skies. Defense Minister Sharon said the victory marked a turning point because the entire Syrian anti-aircraft missile system in the Bekaa Valley was destroyed, and now the way is clear to attack the PLO positions that were being protected by the Syrian missiles. While the battles raged, the Israelis continued pouring long convoys of armored forces into Lebanon. Hour after hour, the tanks and armored personnel carriers rolled in, a force so strong that it was obviously intended to cope with the Syrian army, not only the PLO. Elsewhere, this is the first look at the mopping up operations in the coastal town of Sidon, which was regional PLO headquarters. These Palestinian prisoners were taken as the Israelis continued rooting out the die-hard defenders in tough house-to-house fighting. North of Sidon, the Israelis have captured Damour, just 10 miles from Beirut, and Arab sources claim some Israeli troops are only 2 miles from Beirut airport, increasing the expectation that they may attack PLO centers in Beirut itself. In the central sector, the Syrians say they are clashing with Israelis at Ain Bara, overlooking the strategic Beirut-Damascus highway in a position to cut off the Syrian troops around Beirut. Today, the cost of all this was evident as the funerals were being held. The Israelis say they have lost 32 dead so far, and there are 144 wounded. Trying to stop it all, American mediator Philip Habib met again with Prime Minister Begin and took Begin's appeal to avoid war to President Assad in Damascus. Meanwhile, as the Israeli convoys rolled through the night to build up their forces in Lebanon, reserves are being called up to strengthen Israeli positions facing the Syrians on the Golan Heights. And so tonight, the Israeli mission has gone beyond wiping out the PLO. They are now creating new facts, as the Israelis like to say, creating a new political and military situation in Lebanon aimed at getting rid of the Syrian army and restoring sovereignty to the Lebanese government. Bill Siemens, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Lebanon